My budget going into this was I said, I'm going to spend $200,000. This is crazy. Like, we can't invest in Portugal. Then, if you remember, a couple months later, we had this thing, COVID-19. I didn't convert any money at the time. I was waiting because I was getting greedy. Probably wondering why I'm calling you on a Sunday. And I said, yes, I am. Oh my God. So I got absolutely obliterated. Like, Michael, you're not going to believe this. There was another fire in the building. And I said, you've got to be kidding me.
Hi, everyone. This is Jack Allwild with another money episode. Today, we have very special guest, Michael Albaum. Michael, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Jack, for having me. Really appreciate it. Super excited to be here.
So, before we get into helping people think about getting their first rental, I do like to ask everyone, what was your relationship like with money growing up?
It's a really good question, man. So I was very one of the fortunate few, I think, in that I had a very healthy relationship with money growing up. My dad was a big advocate of teaching all his kids. I'm one of three boys. I'm the middle child and have a chronic case of middle child syndrome. Anybody else out there listening can totally relate, I'm sure. So we talked about money very openly. We talked about business very openly. And one of the most poignant memories I have of when I turned, I think like 10 or 11, maybe 12, for my birthday, my dad got me a couple shares of stock, and it was GMC stock. And so he had the physical stock certificate, because back in those days it was physical. And then we would look in the paper every morning and see what the stock price was doing. And so we talked about stocks and learning about stocks. And so this was kind of my first soiree into money. But I consider myself very fortunate in that it wasn't taboo, it wasn't odd, it wasn't awkward to talk about. It was what we talked about at the dinner table.
I guess, were your parents like, did they open the veil, like in terms of budget, anything like that with the kids?
A little bit. So we got an allowance for doing chores. And so it was very much of you work for your money, you earn your money. So I think I was instilled with a fairly strong work ethic from a very young age. And as the day I turned 16, I got like multiple jobs and I was always doing side hustles and stuff. As far as like budgeting, it wasn't until we were a little bit older that I started asking my dad, like, hey, how much money do you make? Because I'm like, we live a really nice lifestyle. We never wanted or were worried about where our next meal was going to come from. We were fortunately never at risk of getting our power shut off. Like, I know so many people that wasn't their reality growing up. And so I consider myself very lucky and very fortunate. But it wasn't until I got a little bit older that he lifted up the curtain a little bit and was like, okay, this is what the numbers are. And I was like, oh man, okay, well, that's what I need to do then to figure out how to live my life in a similar manner and provide for my family in a similar way. But I've since gone off kind of on a different path and leveraged real estate in a much bigger way. He was a business owner, entrepreneur. I'm doing things in a little bit different way, hoping to get to the similar result.
Uh, so speaking of real estate, your ex profile, he's at Michael Albaum, by the way, and your tagline is building an education platform to help 1,000 people purchase their first investment property. So how did you get the real estate bug?
Yeah, dude. I got bit and I got bit hard. And it was like over a decade ago, I started my first job out of school and was working as an engineer, making a great salary. And then I got my first paycheck and I was like, whoa, that's not going to cut it. So I said, there's got to be another way. And I got that little purple book that I'm sure so many of your viewers have seen, The Rich Dad Poor Dad. Yep. And I read it and I was like, oh my God, like this just makes so much sense. And I'm a professional engineer by training. And so numbers and math is like second nature to me. And so I'm like, okay. And I just had this like, that scene in A Beautiful Mind when he's like writing on the chalkboard and there's all the equations getting solved. That was like going in my head. I was started making all these connections. I'm like, okay, I could do this. So I spent a couple years getting self-educated since Bigger Pockets really wasn't around at the time, and I wasn't aware of podcasts. So I was just consuming as much information as possible. And I was like, okay, I can do this. And so my dad introduced me to a property manager in Southern California that we knew was a family friend. And I bought my first deal in a market that I was semi-familiar with because we grew up kind of going on weekend vacations down there. And when that first rent check showed up in my bank account, I'm like, I'm a genius. I figured out the unlock to life. I did it. And granted, of course, there are millions upon millions of people who have done it well before me and figured it out. But I didn't know that. And so I thought that I had just figured out this unlock. And I was just like, if I can do this 10 times over 10 years, like once a year, that'll be awesome. I'll have 10 properties. And that sounded like a good number. And so, right, like that was the moment where I was like, oh my God, this is the path. Like this is the answer. And since then, I've just been running as hard as I could at this.
Awesome. So you mentioned, I guess, so what people could take away from that is potentially tapping into your current network. So you got a family friend to at least ask some questions. And as far as how the financing went on that first deal, can you kind of describe what the deal was like and how you got financing?
Yeah, totally. So it was way over my budget. My budget going into this was, I said, I'm going to spend $200,000 on a property, and everything we saw was 300,000 in north. And I was like, ah, crap, I guess I can't invest here. And my dad sat me down and he's like, dude, look at what the monthly cost is to own this property. And I'm like, okay, yeah, okay. So, I'm comfortable with that number. And he goes, that's what you need to focus on. Don't worry about the $300,000 mortgage or the $300,000 price point. Like, yes, that's important, but look at it in bite-sized pieces. I was like, okay, yeah, I can do that. And I said, my salary is more than going to cover my living expenses plus this monthly expense. And so I said, worst case scenario, if I don't have a tenant, it's not like I'm going to be out on the street. I can still afford to live my life. It's just going to be losing money. And I said, but with the tenant, it's going to make a little bit of money. I said, okay, I'm willing to roll the dice on that. So it was $295,000 was the purchase price. I used an interest-only loan, put 20% down, very traditional way to buy something, and I used the interest only because it was not going to cash flow on a full principal and interest payment. So my dad said, look, structure it this way. You're not going to pay down the loan, but you'll have 5 years of interest only, and then by that time, hopefully the rent will have increased to a point where that it'll support a full payment. And I was like, okay, well, that's kind of cool. It's kind of a different way of thinking about things. So that's what I did. And lo and behold, that was correct. And so it worked out really well. It worked out really well. And I bought a turnkey rental. It was a bank-owned foreclosure. And so I didn't want to do any kind of work. I was like, I'm already spending an ungodly amount of money on this down payment. There's no way I could afford to pay for additional repairs. So I said, I want someone to be able to move in day one. Turnkey wasn't even a term I was really familiar with at the time, but that's what it ended up being.
So when you say interest only, what was the interest shifting like every 5 years, or how did the terms of that actually work?
Yeah, great question. So it was an interest only loan, which means when you look at a loan, there's usually two components. There's the principal component and the interest component. And the principal component is simply the amount of dollars that you've borrowed that you're paying back over time. So I think it was like whatever, $250,000, $240,000, something like that was the principal amount. You're paying that back over the life of the loan, but you're also paying back the interest, and the interest is on top of that. And so most people don't realize, but when you actually look at what's called an amortization schedule, which is a schedule that breaks down what the interest portion is and what the principal portion is of a loan over the life of the loan, you pay back like double what you ended up borrowing because of the interest. So, but I wasn't concerned with that. I said, because I'm going to be cash flowing it like somebody else is paying off this loan essentially. So interest only is you're only paying the interest portion of the payment. There's no principal payment. So in terms of dollars, it's a smaller amount, but at the end of the 5-year term, the loan switches to be a fully amortized loan, is what it's called, is the term where you're paying principal and interest at whatever the prevailing interest rate is. And so it reset at that 5-year period. I ended up having to get super lucky because when I bought the thing, the timing of it was great. I bought it in like 2013 or 2014. So fast forward 5 years, 2018, interest rates were super favorable. So it ended up working out well. But so it's a great way to structure a loan if you're going to be holding it, if you know what the hold period is, and if you're okay rolling the dice a little bit for, I'm going to gamble on what interest rates could be down the line.
Mhm. Plus, you get the exposure to the possible appreciation of just the overall market.
Exactly. And so what a lot of folks do is they'll use interest only for, let's say, 5 years. They'll go buy a property. They'll do something to it that increases the value of the property. So they'll probably get cash flow over that 5-year period, and then they'll go look to sell the thing. And so, yeah, of course, they haven't made a dent on their principal payment. But again, if you look at an amortization schedule, the amount of principal that you're paying down in that first 5 years is usually very, very small. It tends to ramp up, going up and to the right over time. So the longer you hold the loan, the more principal you've paid down. So the first 5 years on a 30-year loan, you're barely touching it anyhow. So don't worry about that. Have a smaller payment, cash flow the thing, and then you can go sell it, make a killing. It can be a really great strategy if you understand what you're doing.
Awesome. Can you describe what your portfolio looks like in now?
Yeah, so I had this vision of buying 10 homes over a 10-year period, one a year, and I was going to do all single family. And I very quickly started going out of state, buying small multifamily, commercial multifamily, because I realized how much more affordable it was outside of my market or outside of California. So I own about 60, 65 units, mostly multifamily, small commercial multifamily. So anyone who's listening who's not familiar, that's 5 units and greater. So if you go buy a building that's 1 to 4 units, that's considered residential. And if you go buy a 5+ unit, that's considered commercial. And so I kind of cut my teeth in the multifamily space in the 5 to 12 units. And at the time I was buying them, there was just nobody else interested. And I was looking around and I was like, oh crap, like what does everybody else know that I don't? Am I making a huge mistake? There was no competition at the time. Fast forward a couple years, that's what everybody wanted. So I was like, okay, maybe I was a little ahead of the curve. And so that's really where I've made the bulk of my investments. And that most sizable part of my portfolio is those types of buildings and units in the Midwest.
Uh, and are we talking what cities and states?
So it's northern Kentucky in a market called Covington, and then just across the river is Cincinnati, Ohio. And so I had heard of Cincinnati, Ohio. I had never heard of Covington, Kentucky. So I ended up investing in Covington and then also in Cincinnati. That's the bulk of my portfolio.
Cool. What can you tell us about this property or properties in Portugal?
Oh man. So okay. Like pre-pandemic, my wife and I went traveling and we went to Portugal because we thought we'd heard about it and we heard it was like California was 30 years ago. We went there and we had an okay time. We went in January or December, January. We had an okay time. Um, and the next year we decided we want to go traveling again and we were visiting friends in Spain. And so we said, let's go back to Portugal and let's maybe give it another try. And we had this incredible time, this amazing trip. And my wife found out about this program called the Golden Visa. And basically, it's a program that exists in a lot of countries all over the world. We have one in the States, by the way. And it's where if you invest or do something in the country, usually it involves money of some sort or starting a business, it's a pathway to getting a passport into citizenship. And so my wife was like, Michael, what if we did this in Portugal? Because in Portugal, they had a property investment vehicle. Like if you invest in property, it's a way to take advantage of the Golden Visa and get citizenship. And she lived in Sweden for a number of years and did her undergrad there and was living there and working there. And she could have gotten her citizenship and passport, but just never did. And she was like, man, like that was a missed opportunity. Here's a new opportunity. I'm like, this is crazy. Like we can't invest in Portugal. She's like, why not? Like you invest all over the country. Why can't we do this? And so she was a big driver. And the more we found out about it, the more we kind of started scratching our heads going, we can do this. It is kind of crazy, but we can do this. And so we ended up investing in a property in Portugal, and there was all these stipulations around the cost and how it's financed and this and that and the type of property and where it is. And this was all during the pandemic. So navigating this world was just unbelievably complicated and difficult, but we did it. And right before we were about to close, our attorney, because you use an attorney in Portugal to do all the closing paperwork, was like, hey, the seller screwed up. This property doesn't qualify for the Golden Visa anymore. And we were like, oh, shoot. And I was like, okay, well, what are my options? They said, well, you could basically kill the deal and walk away, get all your money back, or you could buy the thing. And then it just wouldn't be a Golden Visa property. And I was like, well, okay, what if I flipped it? And they were like, yeah, you could do that too. I was like, okay, let's close on the deal. And so we closed on the deal. And it was crazy because so Golden Visa properties have to be bought in cash. And so I refinanced a bunch of stuff in the States to have the cash to go put into this deal. And I said, well, now this isn't a Golden Visa property. I said, can I finance it? And they said, yeah. So I went to a Portuguese bank and they said, okay, yeah, we'll finance the thing. The financing is a little bit different there. So they only gave me 50% loan to value. So they only gave me 50% of the cost. But their loan was tied to the Euribor, which is their a European benchmark, which was negative at the time. And so my mortgage rate was 1%. Like I had a 1% mortgage in Portugal. Now, turns out that wasn't fixed. So it stayed at 1% for a couple of years. And then I kind of got hammered when it adjusted. I didn't really understand how it all worked. So now it's at like 4.5%, which sucks when you're paying 1%, but still 4.5% is like amazing compared to so many other parts of the world. So we ended up buying a different property that did qualify for the golden visa. So now we have 2 units in Portugal. The first one is turned into a short-term rental Airbnb that's fully managed and it's awesome. It's doing great. The other one is kind of a unique set of circumstances, but so we make a little bit of money on that. At the end of the day, we're losing money on it, but it's the whole goal is to have it get us to the citizenship piece. We're like, that's okay. We're okay with that.
Are the loans that you got in Portugal, are those denominated in euros or dollars?
Yeah, they're in euros. So it's with a
They're in
Portuguese bank. It's a Portuguese bank account. I have a US account, a USD account at the Portuguese bank. And so when I send money, I'll usually send it in dollars. Well, that's not true. I'll usually send it in euros. I'll use like the company Wise because they give you the
uh,
best conversion rate, as opposed to letting the bank give me a conversion rate because they tack on fees and stuff. So if I have to send money back and forth, I'll use Wise to do that and convert it through them.
okay, interesting. Yeah, because I know the dollar's been gaining against the euro the last couple years, and
Yes.
I had heard from other people that sometimes the mortgage originator always wants the loan to be in the currency in which you're making money. So like even if I was getting a loan like in Austria, sometimes they would want my loan to be in US dollars, even though they use the euro. So I was just curious on that.
Yeah.
Um,
No, it's all euros,
okay.
which makes it easier. But it's funny you
Mhm.
mentioned like the conversion rate because that was something I was definitely looking at. And so we bought this property in 2020, and we locked it in basically that hey, we're going to buy this thing in January of 2020 when we were over in Portugal. And then if you remember, a couple months later we had this thing COVID-19. And so but at the time the US dollar was gaining on the euro, and so it was like 94, 95, 96, 97 cents against the euro, which is like almost 1 to 1. I was like, "Oh my god, we're going to be able to do this conversion and have it be 1 to 1." Well, then March, April come, the dollar drops, like, and so I just got out, and I didn't convert any money at the time. I was waiting because I was getting greedy, and I was like, oh my god. So I got absolutely obliterated when it came to actually changing money at the conversion. And every time I sent in a chunk of money, it was lower and lower and lower. I was like, okay, well, this sucks. So I mean, lesson learned for the small niche of folks out there listening that might be investing internationally. Like, when you make that decision, convert the money. Don't wait to have it rise. Just be okay with what the rate is today, and do the thing, because it could always get worse.
Mhm. And I'm sure many listeners are listening and think, well, man, it seems like so overwhelming to invest even out of state, let alone out of country. So like, can you talk through some of those initial systems you had to set up to invest in a Covington and Cincinnati area?
Yeah, absolutely. So I had a bit of a cheat code and kind of leg up, to put it bluntly, when I was starting investing, in that I was working a job that was traveling me all over the country, mostly Western
Mhm.
US, but kind of all over the place. And so I bought these first 2 deals in Southern California in a market that I knew, with a property manager I knew, with an agent I knew. And so I was used to already picking up the phone to make phone calls about the property, as opposed to driving to see them in person. And so I was now traveling to these other markets, and I would hop on Zillow, because now I was a big bad real estate investor, and look at what the market was renting for and selling for. And so I would set up meetings while I was on these work trips. I would meet with realtors, I would meet with property managers, and just go have face-to-face coffee meetings, and figure out, okay, who do I want to work with in these particular markets, and who can take me on property tours and such. So I was doing a lot of this stuff face-to-face. But when I decided to go invest in the Midwest, I was like, oh, I can just do this stuff over the phone. Like, I don't have to go there. And the other thing, Jack, that I always share with folks that I work with that are like, I can't get over the fact of like not physically going and seeing the property. I said, well, then go. Like, don't let not physically going there once be the hurdle that you can't overcome to investing in a particular market. And I said, but I'll say with a caveat, if you can imagine, you're going on a weekend trip to a particular market, to a Covington, to look at the market, and you go and you're having breakfast before you meet with the agent, and you go park your car and you go and you have breakfast at a local diner, and the wait staff is just like super rude to you, and they bring you the wrong food and it sucks, and then you go to your car and you got a parking ticket. You're gonna have a bad day. You're gonna have this kind of bad taste in your mouth, right? And even if the agent shows you these amazing deals, you're just gonna have these personal biases that have bled into that trip. Now, conversely, if you go and you have this amazing meal with this amazing wait staff and you don't get a ticket on the car and everybody you meet is so lovely and nice and friendly, you're going to have also personal biases that affect your decision-making capabilities and think, oh, this is an amazing market, even if financially it doesn't make the most sense. And so I, being a remote investor, am kind of a big fan of not going and letting your decisions be data-driven purely. So there's the good and the bad of going in person and having these experiences and blending your personal biases on top of and letting those bleed into the decision-making process, which again could be good or bad. But you just need to understand that yes, we all as humans have personal biases, and those can impact our decisions, and emotions play a part here. And so we need to do our best to remove those from the process. And doing it remotely, I find, is the best way to do that.
So what was the tipping point that made you pick like the Covington, Cincinnati area over other Midwestern cities?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, and I wish it was like more scientific, but it's comical like talking about it now. I was on Zillow, and back in the day you could have on both the purple for rent tab and the red for sale filter at the same time. And so I just literally plugged in $100,000 sale price and renting for $1,000. That was my mental, like, okay, that's kind of within my price range and where I want to be. And I was zooming out on the entire country and saw, okay, where are there a bunch of clusters of these things? Because I not only wanted to invest in a market where it had those types of deals, but I was looking to do this a bunch of times because I got advice. I was so sick of investing all over the country. I want to go in one particular market again and again and again and again. And so I said, okay, let me go find the market that has the deals to support my wanted deal flow. And so Covington had that. And so I said, okay, Covington, Kentucky, I never heard of this place. So I started doing market research about it, and turns out, okay, it's a bedroom community of Cincinnati, Ohio. People oftentimes will work in Cincinnati but live in Covington because it's cheaper. Kentucky has its own economy, and Covington has its own downtown that was in the process of being revitalized. There was a bunch of new construction, a bunch of new multifamily Class A stuff going in, a bunch of breweries, a bunch of new restaurants, stadiums going in on the Ohio side. So the more I started learning about this market, the more I was like, this is very interesting. And then I think the piece that kind of tipped me over the edge into, yes, this is like a go for me, was I learned about a local incentive that the city of Covington was offering to developers, which basically was, hey, we're giving money away to developers to build additional housing units over commercial units. They call it mixed use, and where you've seen shops on the bottom floor and lofts or apartments above. I said, okay, well, there's something going on here. If the city is giving money away, they are clearly trying to incentivize growth. And turns out it was actually an opportunity zone as well, which for those of your listeners who might not be familiar with it, I wasn't at the time. I think it was a 2017 designation, hoping to spur investment and growth in particular markets around the country. There are very, very significant tax incentives to investing in these opportunity zones, which are designations around the country in different markets. Covington happened to be one of those. So I was like, okay, there's a lot of signs pointing to there is growth happening in this particular market. And the price points and rents supported investing there. So I said, great, like, let's do this thing.
Awesome. And as far as getting like project management in place, are there any, I don't know, tactics or things through trial and error that you've learned, like in how to almost interrogate these project or property managers?
Absolutely. Yes, 100%. Because I've slept on my own advice and not done that, and it just like kicked me in the face so many times. So there's a couple different tactics that I personally like to use when screening and interviewing property managers. One of them is picking up the phone and calling them as a prospective tenant and seeing how you're treated, and just see what's that process like as a tenant of someone trying to live here. Because property managers have two clients. They've got the owners and then they've got the renters, and you need both for a successful business. And if you're treating one poorly or not getting back to them, that's not a great indication of a well-run business. And it's funny, I posted this, like one of my first posts on Twitter when I first got on, or X now as it's called, was talking about this, like, oh, you should do this. And I got so like a bunch of hate. People were like, oh my God, you're starting the relationship out on a fallacy or on a lie. And I was like, dude, shut up. Like, you must be a bad property manager who doesn't want to get caught treating their prospective tenants poorly. So they should be treating everybody with respect and getting back to them in a timely manner. So I think it's a great tactic. I've developed and built over the years of having these conversations hundreds of times with different property managers. What are the questions to be asking? And what are the answers that you should be thinking about? And what does one answer mean versus a different answer? And so I developed this and put it into my program at MyFi Academy because it's really difficult. Like as a first-time investor, if I ask the question, if I know what questions to ask and I get an answer, how am I supposed to know if that's good, bad, or indifferent? And so that's why I said, okay, these are all the things I wish I had, but when I first started investing. So that's kind of what the impetus for MyFi Academy was, and all the various resources that I've built. And so it just helps you have those conversations with property managers, with agents, with CPAs, with attorneys, with lenders, with insurance representatives, because there are all these various people that you should be talking to. That again, you might not know what questions to ask, and even if you do, you might not know what their answers mean. And so I built all this stuff for everybody out there.
And as you've built this out, what are the common like themes or threads of questions that the new people are coming to you with? Like what seemed to be the biggest hurdles for people starting out?
So it's two. The first one is, hey, my parents got burned in '08 by real estate. Real estate equals bad. The second one is, I don't have a ton of money to invest. I need a bunch of money, don't I? And so it's these misunderstandings or these misnomers, I would say, around the risks and the processes involved with real estate investing, because they have this false equivalency of real estate equals bad. And then it's how much money they truly need to get started. And I think both types of people are surprised when we start putting together the facts and doing a little bit of a post-mortem on what maybe went wrong with their parents or family members' investment, or their investment if they invested previously and got burned. When you start to understand what are the facts surrounding the situations, what actually happened, what did they do or what did they not do, we start to get some clarity around, oh, well, that's why this went sideways, or that's the reason this didn't work out. There's usually a smoking gun involved in this that we can point to and say, okay, well, yeah, we're not going to do that again. This is how we're going to do it, and this is why it's different. It's a hurdle for people to easily overcome. And again, having a partner holding their hand, walking them through all this is also helpful. From what I've heard, is like, oh, okay, I understand why that happened, and this is how we're going to do it differently. And secondly, when we start to talk about, okay, if you need 20% down for an investment property, and there are still tons of properties out there for $100,000, that's 20 grand plus some closing costs and some additional reserves. You don't need an arm and a leg to invest in real estate. And when you look at the various pools that you can draw from and levers you might have to pull, like a 401k loan, that you might not need to have it all sitting in cash in your bank account. Like, there are ways to do this. And so I just encourage people, like, if this is important to you, if you believe in this, look to make it happen, because a lot of us can't afford not to.
Yeah, I mean, Michael, I appreciate you telling us the thing with the Forex risk in the Portugal property. What would you say? And a lot of people only see the good things, like there's a lot of, rah and
I know. Look at me, Lamborghini.
Right. So can you just maybe stateside, what's been like maybe a bad or like some unfortunate event that happened to you while you've been a landlord?
Okay, you ready for this, dude?
I'm ready.
So because I was a big bad real estate investor, decided to take on this development project. I bought a 20,000 square foot mixed use building in a historic part of downtown Covington. It had, at the time, 4 residential units and 4 commercial spaces. And so because I was telling you about this program where the city was giving money away to developers, I'm like, oh, I'll convert some of these units and that'll be awesome. I'll get money to do it and this will be great. So my original plan was to convert one of the units, split it in half so that it would be 5 residential units, and I would keep all the commercial spaces. Okay, well, the further along I got in this project, the more I realized that's not going to work. And so I needed to convert another one of the big commercial spaces into 5 additional units. And then further along I got into the process that I realized, okay, now I need to convert the bottom floor into 5 additional units because I needed to put in an elevator otherwise, which was going to be like 200 grand. So I'm like, oh crap, what if I convert these units? No need for the elevator. Great. So now this project turned into 15 units residential and 2 commercial. took on a life of its own. So things are going okay. Things are moving a little bit slow, but it's getting there. And I'm in Costa Rica with my wife, and we're traveling and having a ball. And I get a call from my property manager on a Sunday, and he goes, and I go, "Hey, Josh," and he goes, "Hey, you're probably wondering why I'm calling you on a Sunday." And I said, "Yes, I am." He goes, "Well, there's been a fire in the building." And I was like, oh my God. And I used to work as a professional fire protection engineer in the property insurance industry. And I was like, okay, well, this is embarrassing. But I said, first question, is everybody okay? Yes, everybody was okay. There was nobody in the building when it happened. So it turns out there was a fire in the building. So that sucks. Everything gets paused. Insurance comes in doing their thing. Okay, it's manageable. Fast forward a week, I get another call from my property manager. He's like, Michael, you're not going to believe this. There was another fire in the building. And I said, you've got to be kidding me. This time it was on the roof. So I'm like, this is insane. So I got locked into like a 3-year insurance battle with the insurance company for these fires because they're trying to give me pennies on the dollar. I'm trying to get full value for the damage that happened. Now, this was September of 2019 was the first fire. And so again, thinking back to that timeline, we have the pandemic. So imagine this. I have a purchase loan on the building for when I purchased the building. And then I've got a construction loan that I'm using to finance the rehab of this property. Well, I'm still making payments on both of those things. There's no construction progress getting made because it's an active insurance investigation. Everything is going slower and getting drawn out because of the pandemic. And so this is like an absolute nightmare situation where I am just having to pour money into this thing. It's not spitting off any kind of return. There's no progress being made. There's no light at the end of the tunnel of when this thing is going to get done. And I'm like, oh my God, I can't even sell the building out from under myself because I took this money from the city, and there were stipulations around I had to own it and operate the building for 5 years. Otherwise I had to give the money back. And I'm like, oh my God, like this is insane. So I basically pulled every lever that I could. I grabbed equity from every other property I could, refinanced, cashed out to keep this thing alive. And it was awful. Like it sucked. It absolutely sucked. My contractor was going super slow. It was just like everything that could have gone wrong, I think did. And I've since finished the project, got it rented out. It's now chugging along. Not doing as great as I would have liked it to, of course, but I'm now in the black, and it's rented, and that's the important thing. And I got out from under those construction loans and under those purchase loans, which were kind of shorter term and ended up being variable. But it sucked, and there's like no other way to put it. And it ate my lunch for a couple of years, and it was really, really hard for a couple of years. And I think that the biggest takeaways that I've learned from that is don't let your ego drive your decision making, because this was one of the things I was like, oh my God, this is sexy. This is a big deal. Look at all this money I could make when I was underwriting the thing. So don't let pie in the sky drive you, because you need to understand the downside. And I had no business developing a property. I'd never done it before. I was remote. I had no business being my own project manager, keeping track of the GC and all of his subs. Like there are so many things that I could have done differently that would have made this project go better. First and foremost is not do it, not start it. But then also not try to do everything yourself, kind of on the cheap. And then secondly is involve a public adjuster as soon as you can if you're involved in an insurance claim. Like anyone who doesn't know, a public adjuster is somebody who advocates for the insured, for us as the client, against the insurance company, because the insurance company has a bigger legal team and more dollars than you or I could ever imagine. And so we need somebody to stand up on our behalf. And that's what a public adjuster does. And so I wasn't something I was familiar with. I got them involved late in the process. It was the best decision I made, but it was made too late. And so I think, again, if anybody listening out there or watching is involved in an insurance claim or has an insurance claim, like reach out to a public adjuster. It is the best money you'll ever spend. And they usually get paid as a function of how much they get for you. So talk about like aligning incentives. The more money they get for you, the more money they make. So I'm like, hell yeah, go get them, Tiger.
Awesome. Well, yeah, thanks for sharing that. That was, yeah, it's nice to hear some of the stumbling blocks that people come to.
Yeah, I mean, it's not talked about enough. Right? It's like you said, it's all this rah, you're going to get rich, you can quit your job tomorrow kind of a thing. It's like, no. I mean, maybe for some, but that's not the majority. And so it's important to talk about, like, yeah, things are going to go sideways, and things are not always going to go according to plan, and you're going to get punched in the face, but that's okay. That's okay.
Yeah. I mean, what would you say is like your kind of like overall macro outlook on real estate, like the next, I don't know, 10 years? Like, how do you feel about people getting into real estate right now?
It's going to be awesome. I don't know a single person, Jack, that said, I wish I would have bought less real estate 10 years ago. Everybody is, man, I wish I would have bought more real estate, because you look at a long enough time horizon, and I think 10 years is a great projection. Things are going to go up and to the right. You zoom out at the real estate market over the last 150, 200 years, for as long as they have data for, that curve goes up and to the right. Now, of course, if we zoom in, there are down years and then there are up years. But as long as overall it's up and to the right, that's great. Now, people could say, oh, I can make more in the stock market, or I can make more in alternative investment. Okay, great. Like, I'm not going to argue with you that that is possible. But I think when you start tacking on the total return in real estate, which is the cash flow that you could make, the appreciation you can make, the loan pay down, and the tax benefits, which most people aren't calculating all four of those in conjunction, real estate tends to be a pretty kick butt performing asset, man. Like, just long term, it's awesome.
So, Michael, what would you want the listeners to know that I haven't really asked you yet?
I think that it's important to understand the downside risks first and foremost before you get involved in any kind of investing. Like, don't let the pie in the sky, like I was kind of mentioning before, drive your decision making. But also, like, and as like, I'm obviously biased because I built an education company, but truly, like, getting a fundamental and foundational education around how to invest in real estate is so critical, is so critical. And we always liken it to like sports or athletes, or trying to do anything new. You go learn how to do that thing. You go learn from either someone who's done it, or you have resources available to you to figure out for yourself how to do that thing. Investing shouldn't be any different. And there are so many pitfalls that you can fall into that I think it's important that people understand, okay, what are those pitfalls? How do I avoid them? In addition to what the potential upside is. Because until you really understand what can go wrong, I would say you have no business investing. Because getting caught, like, the thing I hate most hearing about is people getting blindsided by stuff. It's like, well, then you clearly didn't understand the risks.
So I mean, we're talking on education. I know you had mentioned Rich Dad Poor Dad. Looking back at your real estate journey, are there a couple resources or books that really stand out and like, yeah, that book really affected my trajectory?
I think it was the Bigger Pockets podcast, honestly, Jack. Like,
Okay.
back in the day, like the old school Bigger Pockets, when it was Brandon and Josh. It since has changed, and I'm not as big a fan now. But I think it was just hearing those stories and some of those different strategies around, like, okay, like, maybe I could approach it from this way, or I could tackle it from here, or this is the lens I need to be putting on in order to understand this a little bit better. And just hearing that kind of over and over and over again, and not making me feel like I was so alone in all this, was really inspiring. And I say that with a caveat, in that it can also be a bit of a gatekeeper, and it can be a bit of an obstacle, because you could very easily, and it happened to me, think, okay, one more podcast, or I'll be ready for the deal in one more book, or one more seminar, or one more class. And there's always one more of something. There will always be something else to learn. And so I think you have to find for yourself this fine balance of, okay, I have enough information to make an informed and educated decision, but I don't have the answer to every question, because I never will. And so that you have to be okay living in this world of gray, as I like to say from my former consultant life, of, yeah, it's not black and white. You have to be okay with the gray.
Awesome. Well, Michael, I appreciate you coming on. Why don't you tell the listeners where they can go learn about your program or get in touch with you?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Jack. This was a ton of fun, man. So it's myfiacademy.com, which stands for My Financial Independence Academy. So myfiacademy.com. I'm also on LinkedIn, Michael Albaum. I'm on Instagram, which is never something I thought I'd say, but I am at myfimike. I'm also on Twitter, X, at Michael Albaum.
Awesome. We'll have links to all those. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Jack. Chat soon.